Okay. So Chip Pickering, I want to take a second to say hi to my wife Jan, who invited me here. Today is her birthday.
Oh, birthday!
39 years old. She's doing great with that. But so I certainly the paper I read through it is an excellent way to sort of get yourself in a mindset of what are the things that I'm going to need if something would happen. And I think I'm going to be a little bit more dig into the concept a little bit and kind of let you think about this some more on a macro level. And it's, if you were a Boy Scout, they started with the concept of be prepared. That is your motto. And throughout your life, what does being prepared mean? And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. I'm not going to get real prescriptive about, have 5 gallons or 10 gallons or whatever. I'm going to talk more in general about what we as individuals and what we as a collective community end up dealing with, and what are the processes of our thinking going forward. And that's what I want to leave you with, is to go home and to be able to think, well, okay, how does this relate to me? So that's my goal. These are the organizations that I'm affiliated with, and Jan and I travel with the Red Cross. So our experience is going into communities that have experienced some sort of a disaster, and we take care of the population and meet their immediate needs, while we as the Red Cross help them develop a plan for their own recovery. So, there's always an initial response phase. There's a realization and a planning phase, and then there's an execution phase as to how to get a community to recover. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but that's the general processes that are going on. So we'll talk about what is an emergency and kind of delineate, short-term versus long-term, and these are just concepts that I want you to play with. What is preparedness, both on an individual level and then as a community? And then what are important resources that we are familiar with and that we need to be able to restore the rhythm of life that we're familiar with. I also travel to some places that are very different. We go to some of the most remote areas of Africa and experience people without all of the resources that we have as Americans. They don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have gas, they don't have wastewater treatment, and they get along just fine. You can, but we've organized our society around having these resources and having them fulfill our needs. So when those are disrupted, what do we do? And that's sort of the thing that I want you to be thinking about is, what are the disruptions here and what are the responses to that? So stop me at any time if I'm saying something. These are my opinions, and so if you've got a different opinion or want to augment that, I'm very open to this. I put this together this afternoon. But what is an emergency? And a definition is a serious, unexpected, and often dangerous situation that requires immediate action. So if you think about all of the disruptions that we end up responding to, they're unexpected unless you're prepared for that. And we can talk about what that means. Often dangerous, but it's disruptive, and it requires some sort of immediate action. So you can kind of extrapolate that to a lot of the things that you've seen as a response. We like to understand, and we've built ourselves with these artificial environments. Our home that requires energy, it requires water, it requires the elimination of your waste. All of these things, are artificial environments that we've created to be able to live in and make our life easy. And if those are disrupted, there is a period of time that it takes to restore that. And I think that is sort of the underlying concept of personal response. Is there's some situations that you ride through, and there are some situations that require, you know, a longer term and a different response. Emergencies can disrupt these patterns. So the rhythm of your life is, get up in the morning and take the kids to, and do this and prepare dinner, and all of that uses energy, it uses water, it uses power, it uses machines that make your life easy. And anytime you disrupt that, some people can adapt pretty well to that, and some people can't. And we as a community then holistically need to understand, what are the responses that we need to make to keep ourselves safe and to ride through that situation. And then what about our neighbors and our friends and people we care about? What are they doing? How do they deal with that? So there's not only a component of grab my dog and head for the hills, but what about grandma? What about my neighbor next door that doesn't have the resources to take care of herself or himself? So these are all things that you chew on with your life and say, well, okay, what is my response and what is my contingency planning? But an initial response is usually to identify the character of the disaster and the disruption and what an appropriate response should be. And if it's a short-term response, they require fewer resources. You can ride. This paper actually talks about what happens if it's a 2-day. You've lost your power. Williamstown or Parkersburg is hit with a huge storm, and once you disrupt the power, then you're disrupting the water supply, you're disrupting the wastewater treatment, eventually natural gas that's going to go, and so you could have this cascade of events. That's going to take a longer term response. So it's going to take the community several weeks to be able to dig out of that, to get all of these utilities back online, get the rhythm right, get the water treatment. That's a different response than a power outage that might last 4, 6, 8 hours. And the power company is getting a lot more responsive about that. I mean, if the power goes off, you get a text that says, "We'll have it back on in an hour and a half." Somebody hit a pole down on Highland Avenue or something like that. So they're a lot more responsive, but they're queuing you up. Okay, is this something that you've got to take some action on because it's going to be out for 24 hours? Or is it something that you can turn around and ride through? Go to your neighbor's house if it's cold, and in an hour and a half we'll have your power back on. So this is the community getting better about communicating to you, what the rhythm of that interruption is going to be. And how you need to individually respond to that. So that's the first thing, is the individual response takes communication. And so when we would go in as the Red Cross, and the first thing that you do is you characterize the event. What is the impact to the community? What is the capabilities of the community to be able to respond to that? What are the additional resources that are going to be coming in to be able to support that? How do you organize and deploy that? So we're a part of those decision making, but there are other groups that are actually the first responders and that are trained to be able to do that. And our role is typically supporting. But those are the questions that we ask. So you can have that at a small level, individual level, is, okay, my power's out, what's going on? How long is it going to be? If it's going to be more than 8 hours, what do I do about my refrigerator? What do I do about, so those are things that you're initially, what's that character of this, upset, of this emergency, of this situation? And what is an appropriate response that I need to take? So those are I'm organizing what the thoughts are as you go through this situation. So I'm going to introduce a couple terms to you. Preparedness. Preparedness, in my perspective, anticipating situations that could cause emergencies, that could cause these disruptions. and other stress to populations. And we can talk about whether human beings are the only thing that we're interested in, or a wider population in our communities and other animals and the ecosystems. And then prioritize our behaviors and resources to be able to respond to an emergency. And these are the type of conversations that the emergency management teams have, that the Red Cross engages in. Look at what are the types of emergencies that we typically have, and how do I anticipate what those are going to look like and then respond to them. Prevention includes putting systems in place to mitigate. So if we have all of our utility lines overhead and a big storm comes through, or one of these ice storms that we've got, and the power goes off and it takes a week to be able to get all the power back onto the remote areas. We could have prevented that by burying these lines. And so these are things that cost money, they cost resources, they cost time, but if it's a significant enough hazard, we can do something about that. We can be prepared for that. And we'll talk about emergency generators, batteries, things like that for your home. Those are things that they take resources, but they allow you to respond differently and mitigate the effects of these upsets and disasters and problems later. And then select resources, and whether that's money, whether that's tools and equipment, whether that's generators, whether that's a vehicle, whether that's batteries. Select resources are the things that you need to be able to respond to that. If you don't have the resources that you need, you decide to leave town, but you don't have any money. These are all things that having slack resources, having these emergency funds, having these things available to you. They don't have to be in your garage sitting there, but that's how we prepare for emergency. We can either prevent issues from happening if we can anticipate them, or we can assign slack resources, say, well, if this happens, then I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to respond in this way. So these are the, preparedness is anticipating what might be going on. Preventing it is, if it's significant enough, maybe we need to prevent that from happening. And if not, then, well, okay, I'm going to have some resources around to be able to mobilize into these things that happen. The Red Cross has 6 regional warehouses full of water, food, cots, things like that. And as soon as they see something coming and can characterize where that's going to hit, they send 20 semi-trailers and start picking these up, and they rush to the scene. If it's going to hit Florida, they'll stage in Atlanta. They've got slack resources there because that allows them to be able to respond to an emergency. So if you can take that down to your level, having water sitting in your basement and some food are slack resources. They're things that you're not going to need now, but if you should need them, it's been important enough for you to have them. And you can't respond, you can't go out and buy food on the day that everybody else is buying food because the thing is about to hit or the thing's already hit and you missed the window completely. Resiliency is the ability to respond to various types of disasters and be able to recover quickly. Resiliency is built into the systems that you have. Redundancy, typically. Do I have a couple different ways that I can be able to cook my meals in case something goes wrong? That's redundancy. If you don't have redundancy and your power goes out and your electric stove is off, you don't have the ability to be able to respond to that properly. So redundancy gives you, or resiliency gives you the ability to respond in different ways and to get around the things that you did. And then sustainability introduces the concept of, well, let's do this in a way that we're not impacting future generations, that we're doing it in a way that's sustainable and that makes sense to the environment, to the other members of the community, and to the people that we're working with. So just kind of an extension of the terms as you're starting to think about, well, okay, what what are the perils that I would have, and then how do I consider preparing for those. Resiliency, allows you to build more robust systems to be able to respond in different ways. If you're in a hurricane zone, instead of planning on having your roof ripped off and then replacing it, build your home out of something that's going to be able to withstand that. That's the concept of resiliency, is to anticipate what's going to happen, what are the hazards, and then building a robust system to be able to do that. And sustainability is to do it with an eye on the environment and the future generations. So I want to introduce the concept of community, because really the way we've organized our lives, we live as a member of a community. Your home doesn't operate without electricity. Your home doesn't operate well without water. We've organized ourselves to be able to transport ourselves in these vehicles that require maintenance and fuel and things like that. And so if you take all of these things away, we've organized ourselves around having those. And, the community builds the roads, they give you the power, communication is all now, oriented around cell towers and things like that. And if you can imagine a significant storm coming through here and wiping all that out, you no longer have any of those things. And it's going to take a while for that to be reconstructed. So, but it's the concept of a community. You're not an individual battling this out by yourself. You're a part of a community that's helping to put your community back together again. And that's really, as I see disaster responses, halfway around the globe, it's always, well, okay, how do we as a team figure out how to put things back together again? And it takes time, and it takes us looking after each other while we do it. And it takes people rushing in with water, and people rushing in with food, and people, running around in boats picking the dogs and the cats and the people out of homes or off the rooftops. It's what we do as a community. And we organize and we respond. You've got to be able to have your own resources to be able to be flexible. But we as a community then have, different teams and different resources to be able to respond. But for significant events, preparedness begins with the community's ability to rapidly prepare and respond. So typically it's the fire department, it's the sheriff's department, it's the emergency management groups are the ones that sit around and say, well, okay, what all can happen? What do I need to be concerned with? Just from my perspective in the window of the world that I look at, the Red Cross's disaster response's job is to maintain and support the affected population while assisting with the community's recovery. So if you think about that on a large scale, this is the window that I'm looking at this from. Different types of events drive responses based on the amount of warning. So are you going to get a warning for these various things where you can bunker down and collect some water and do the things that you need to do, or is this going to hit out of the blue and you don't know? Who are the affected population? Is it a large swath of the population? I mean, have you flooded all of New Orleans, or have you had a tornado blow through a community and rip a bunch of homes apart? Each of those responses are very different, based on the community's ability to respond and to support itself. Utility disruptions are important. I mean, we've been in communities for 2 or 3 weeks because they didn't have power. And if you live in Houston in the summertime, we've organized our lives so that people can't live in their homes without power. So it's very different to be able to respond to different types of disasters and access community resources. How long is it going to take to put this back together again so that a significant portion of that community can get back home, and then what are the residual people going to do in the interim period? Individual preparedness involves anticipating the events that can happen in your particular area. So, what are the perils that we have in the Mid-Ohio Valley here? And those are considered risks, and then position ourselves to be able to ride through or recover from those incidents. So we've got an individual response, and then we've got a macro response. I've been in meetings where the emergency management teams have turned around and thrown out a scenario. They call it a tabletop demonstration. What if, a train car loaded with chlorine ended up derailing in Waverly, West Virginia? What are you going to do with this population? What's the radius of the affected area? Where are people going to go? The emergency management teams are planning this out. We're sitting at the table going, okay, well, I would have to have 2 shelters in St. Mary's, 2 shelters in Williamstown and Parkersburg, and what's the population times 30%? Okay, that's how many people we're going to have to feed and house for 2 weeks while we while this situation put back together. So you have on a larger scale, these are the type of plans that we do as a community. But you individually, okay, different types of disasters that you might be hit with as an individual. Are you sheltering in place in your home, or are you going to grandma's house 2 states away? And if so, or if not, do I have enough food for myself, for my dog, for my cat? These aren't things that we normally sit around and think about, but it is good to if we're into preparing, characterize the different things that could be happening. What are the possible events? What's the character and severity? What's the probability of those happening? Do I get any warning for this? And then what's the duration of the event? And then what is my response going to be? So it's a good mental process to put yourself through to say, well, okay, under these circumstances, what am I individually going to do? For our area, the type of scenarios that we consider are major illnesses and injuries. So most of the people, I'm going to be frank here, if you have a heart attack or get a major illness, it usually happens at home. Are you prepared? How many people know CPR and could administer it if they had to? Okay? That should be everybody in here, okay? You never know when you're the person that could save your neighbor's life, because those things happen at home more often than they happen anywhere else. Home fires. We've installed 160,000 smoke detectors and saved 161 lives. That's the most significant hazard that you have in your home in West Virginia. All right? By far, the most significant hazard is your house burning down around you. And all of the preparedness that you might have, all of the thousands of dollars that you've got tucked under your mattress or whatever, isn't going to help you in that situation. So depending on the type of risk that you have and that you're considering, then your response, is going to be a little bit different. And some of the things that you might do to have resources over here might not help over here. Many of the people that come into our shelters have walked out of the house in their pajamas. Can you imagine how difficult it is to walk into a bank and get money if you don't have a driver's license? So just things like that. Where am I putting things that I can grab them as I go out the door? And do I have a smoke detector that's going to alert me to the fact that I have to get out the door? Or am I going to be... So severe winter storms is another significant one. Lots of utility and primary power. So there's warming centers and cooling centers planned around the community to be able to do that. So the community is planning these things, but what is your contingency plan? Flooding is another significant issue for some people, not for many. Straight line winds and tornadoes, we're seeing more and more of those. We've had 4 or 5 in West Virginia in the last year, and it's fairly unheard of in this area. So as the climate changes and things warm up, you're going to see different types of perils and storms happening here. And we've responded to several disasters of this type in West Virginia that we've never done before. Industrial accidents and releases are another significant peril. So, if somebody releases something in the water and you can't drink it for a week, how are your behaviors changed? Imagine not being able to flush your toilet for a while or things like that. So, what's your strategy? And I think a lot of times just thinking through these scenarios and getting an idea, planning in your mind, what will happen? It's not necessarily worth a whole bunch of resources to do, but just mentally thinking through what these processes are. And then pandemics and epidemics, and those are game changers. The kids aren't going to school for a while. Well, okay, how does that disrupt the life, and how do we adapt that? So as a community, we adapt around that. But those are things that, if you're mentally prepared and physically prepared to respond properly to those things. Those are the significant perils that I've identified and experienced in the state. So could be others. That's certainly my disclaimer here. Preparing for different events looks different. So you're not going to be able to build a robust castle around yourself and say, well, okay, I've got everything that I'm ever going to need forever. But just consider the most significant things and what your response might be. Is there any warning? What's the duration? And do I get to ride through it? What's the impact of lost utilities for X period of time in my house? And are we going to have communication? So a lot of the places that we go to is impacted by the challenge of not having the communications networks that we're familiar with. So if you can't get navigation on your phone to be able to get to a shelter, it's difficult to add that dimension to your mental process. Well, okay, how do we do that? Aggregate resources, the water, food, things like that you might need gives you more options. So those slack resources. Identify what's important, and that may not only be in your house, but your neighbors as well. Are there people that can't take care of themselves that you would adopt in time of an emergency? So we think about our neighbors and our neighborhood, and which ones might be more resilient, how we might help. You can't live very long without water, and you can't live without food. So if you're ever given a list of what are these 20 things that you've got to have if you're stranded on an island, the gun and the knife go away. It's water and food, because you only live 2 or 3 days without water, and you can physically live longer in some circumstances, but mentally you lose your capacity to process really efficiently, and food. So those are the things. You need energy, and by the way, you've got pets, and so Walmart's not going to be open if the roof is blown off. So and if power's off, you're not going to be able to get there. Energy. What is the role of energy in your home, and how does it work? Communications, and then my favorite. We got into the COVID thing. Everybody went and bought toilet paper. So stock up on toilet paper if that's important to you. But these are the things just to be thinking about. Okay, what if? And as these things happen, what is the role of these things? And mentally prepare yourself for that. Just touching on energy real quick. The first thing that you can do is use less energy. So energy efficiency, anytime you get a chance to do something for your home. Excuse me. First, go to energy efficiency. Sorry. Good time for questions. anytime you can do anything to use less energy, use natural and resilient products. Resiliency are things that are going to hold their capacity to sustain damage and continue service. And I see this book was written by a Navy SEAL, and their concept of resiliency is being able to take the gut punch and then be able to get up and swinging and defend yourself. So yeah, when a storm comes through and slams the heck out of your community, how have you organized yourself and your resources to be able to ride through that and to be able to respond better? So as you get a chance to make improvements to your home, as you think about energy efficiency and things like that, the less energy you use, the less you got to produce in times of emergency. And most or all energy efficiency improvements pay for themselves over time. So you're doing yourself a favor as you do that. And then sustainability is using energy that has less impact on the environment and more benefits for future generations. So these are my efficiency first, resiliency second, and then sustainability in there, and you can change these around a little bit. Energy efficiency, there are different environmental effects to your decision. So, people have talked to me, well, okay, what about an emergency generator versus a solar system with batteries? Anytime you're plugged in and using power in West Virginia, you're at about 93% coal-based energy. You guys realize that? So you're you're creating about 820 tons of CO2 equivalent per megawatt hour. And an average person uses about a megawatt hour a month. So you're producing 1,600 pounds of CO2 just by plugging things in. Natural gas generators, even higher than that. So if you get a natural gas generator sitting out there and say, well, I'm going to run that for a while, it's actually worse for reasons that we could discuss. Solar and batteries are 0.041 tons. So you're a 20x factor more efficient over time with solar and batteries. And it's an energy source that will pay for itself too. So in the savings. So 12.3% of solar systems have batteries attached, so it's an option now. This is what it looks like in your garage. So these are solar inverters, and then this is the battery system that will give us 24 to 48 hours of power in our home. And increasingly, this is an energy source. So this is an electric vehicle. There are currently 2 models of electric vehicles that are called vehicle to home, so that are generating out into the home and can support an entire home. And then 2 more are vehicle to load. And so you're going to start to see this more and more because these electric vehicles are running around with huge batteries in them. And if you don't need them to be transporting this, 4,000-pound machine around with you to go to the store, then plug it in your house and power your house. So this is the energy source of the future. So it's here, but it's going to be increasingly more available. And so if you're interested in knowing more, so this is a good sheet. It's a good place to start. If you're interested, redcross.org, there's a tab that says Get Help and How to Prepare for Emergencies. And they'll turn around and take you down through. Well, okay, where do you live? What are the types of emergencies that you might have? And what are the things that you might need to be able to ride through and to do this? So I'm not walking away with you guys going, man, he just dumped a bunch of stuff on me without telling me. And they have an app too. So their Red Cross app, just type in Red Cross Emergency and it's going to come up. It's the one with the exclamation point on it. And so you download that app and you walk through and do the same thing. Well, okay, where do I live? What is the type of peril that we tend to have here? And if I were going to do that, what's your recommendation? So somebody's already thought through all of this, given you an idea of what your individual response might be, and then has those things, that they're offering in the same way that the sheet that was handed out. So this is me and what I do. The only other thing that I'll say is if responding to other communities in their time of need is something that's interesting to you, I'd be glad to talk to you, or Jan could talk to you about what it means to be a volunteer in the Red Cross. It doesn't mean you have to go fly to Guam and take care of things, although you can, but it means knowing what to do and how to do it when your community is hit with a disaster and we need someone to open a shelter in the Methodist Church in Williamstown, or at Marietta College, and are you going to be able to jump in and help? So I'm open for questions now. Yeah.
Is it so that in an emergency anyone can use a ham radio? You don't have to be licensed.
So I'm not familiar with ham radios, but they are fairly complicated, and so the ham radio has their own network for emergency communications, and so there may be channels or maybe frequencies that you can talk on that you're not licensed, but I think there's an emergency network of ham radios, and IEEE, which is Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, also manages a communication network using that same thing. So I would say, as a rule, probably, don't go jump on a ham radio and try to talk to somebody. I think it's a lot more technical than that. Yes?
I think we need to be a lot more prepared, because the weather department has cut so many, the weather department got cut. They I think it was Kansas or whatever, just had a tornado and no warning because
The National Weather Service is not at the level of service that they used to be. So it's a real good point, and not only do you have the weather changing on a global basis, but what are the local effects? And the devil's in the details. It's all about, West Virginia is starting to see things that we've never seen. So you can't really characterize those if you don't have enough of them to develop a pattern or a rhythm for them. But if things are happening and you're used to somebody giving you, 2 hours notice or 15 minutes notice, or, get down in the basement, and then it doesn't happen because, those people weren't there. It's certainly a part of the hazards that we face, and we probably should adapt accordingly. Yeah. And the Red Cross has another app for that. Jan, what's that one called? The one that goes off all the time. Yeah, it's the emergency app. So you can plug it in and say, "Follow me around the country," and then if you're in Florida and there's a peril coming on, it'll beep, 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 beep. By the way, you're about to be hit with a windstorm. Take cover. And so there are tools that are being created, and then there are some that we've always relied on. National Weather Service, NOAA, a lot of the resources that the government has always had to help with it are either being replaced by private entities or not being replaced at all. Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.